The morning sun peeked through the blinds, scattering light across the small, cozy kitchen. Margaret stood by the counter, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. The quietness of the house always felt different these days, both comforting and lonely. Her son Daniel had moved back home a few months ago after finishing college. And though she loved having him around, something about his presence had changed. He wasn't the same boy who left for college 4 years ago. He was taller now, more serious, quieter. There was a calmness about him that she admired, but also a distance she couldn't quite understand. He would smile at her often gentle, thoughtful smiles that made her heart ache in ways she couldn't explain. There was emotion in them, something deeper than simple kindness. Every time their eyes met, it felt as though Daniel wanted to say something, but stopped himself just before the words left his lips. That morning, she heard the sound of soft footsteps. Daniel appeared in the doorway, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and jeans, his hair still messy from sleep. He smiled when their eyes met. "Morning, Mom," he said, his voice low and calm. Margaret smiled back. "Morning, sweetheart. You're up early," he shrugged, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Couldn't really sleep." She studied his face for a moment. There was a hint of something fatigued, maybe worry, but he hid it well behind that same calm demeanor. "Something on your mind?" she asked. Daniel looked down at his mug, swirling the coffee before taking a sip. "Just thinking, I guess." She wanted to ask more, but she didn't. Over the past few months, she'd learned that sometimes silence was easier than pressing too hard. She'd raised Daniel alone since he was 10, and they had always been close. But now that he was a man, she could feel the invisible wall that adulthood often brings between parents and children. As she set her mug down, she said softly, "You can talk to me about anything, right?" He looked at her, and for a moment, his eyes softened. "I know, Mom," he said, with a smile that carried warmth and something else, something unreadable. The day went on quietly. Margaret spent her afternoon cleaning the living room while Daniel worked on his laptop. Every now and then she'd glance at him, noticing how focused he looked. He had grown into such a responsible young man. Still, she could sense that something was troubling him. He wasn't his usual easygoing self. Later that evening, after dinner, they sat together on the porch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain from the distant fields. The sky was painted in shades of purple and orange. The last light of day fell softly across their faces. Margaret broke the silence first. "Do you remember when you were little and we used to sit here watching the stars?" Daniel smiled faintly. "Yeah, you'd make up stories about constellations." She laughed softly. "You always wanted to believe they were real. They felt real back then," he said. Then, after a pause, he looked at her. "I miss those days sometimes." Margaret nodded, her chest tightening with emotion. "Me too." There was a pause long enough that the chirping of crickets filled the air. Then Daniel spoke again quietly. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated, his gaze fixed on the fading sky. "Do you ever feel like time moves too fast? Like one moment everything's the same, and then suddenly nothing is?" The question caught her off guard. She thought for a moment, then replied, "All the time. Especially now that you're grown." Daniel nodded slowly, still staring ahead. "It's strange. I used to think life would make more sense as I got older. But sometimes it feels like it makes even less." Margaret smiled softly. "That's because you start to see how much really matters. The older you get, the more you realize it's not about having answers, it's about learning to live with the questions." He looked at her then, really looked, and smiled a quiet, meaningful smile that seemed to hold more than words ever could. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Margaret could feel her heart swell with unspoken emotion. That smile, it wasn't just gratitude or affection. It was something deeper, something she couldn't name. "Mom," Daniel said finally, "you're the strongest person I know." The words were simple, but the sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. She blinked back tears and tried to laugh lightly. "Oh, I doubt that. I mean it," he said, his tone steady. "You've done everything on your own. You worked hard, raised me, made sure I had everything I needed. I don't think I've ever really said thank you for that." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "You don't have to thank me, Daniel. You're my son. That's all that ever mattered." He nodded, still smiling. "Yeah, but I want to, because I wouldn't be who I am without you." Margaret didn't know what to say. The love in his eyes, the way he looked at her with warmth and respect, filled her with pride and sadness all at once. He was growing up, stepping into a life of his own. She could already feel him slipping away bit by bit. The next day passed quietly. Daniel helped her fix a leaky faucet in the kitchen, made her laugh with an old joke, and played music while they cleaned the house. For a moment, it almost felt like the old days, again simple and full of laughter. But beneath the laughter, there was still something in Daniel's expression. Something that looked like he was holding on to a secret that evening. When Margaret was folding laundry, Daniel came to her and leaned against the doorframe. "Hey," he said softly. She looked up and smiled. "Hey yourself." He hesitated for a second. "I've been thinking. Maybe we should take a trip. Just the two of us. Somewhere quiet." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "A trip? You're serious?" He nodded. "Yeah, you deserve a break. And I just want to spend some time with you." Her heart softened. "That sounds wonderful, Daniel." He smiled again, that same mysterious, heartfelt smile that she still couldn't quite read. "Good, we'll plan it soon." When he walked away, she felt her chest tighten again. That smile lingered in her mind long after he'd gone upstairs. There was something about it that felt like a message, like he was trying to tell her something without saying it that night. When the house fell silent, Margaret lay awake, thinking about him. She thought about the years that had passed, the laughter they had shared, and the quiet moments that seemed to mean more now than they ever had before. She remembered his smile again, how warm, yet strangely wistful it had been. It wasn't just a smile of love or gratitude. It was a smile that felt like a bridge between the past and whatever was coming next. Margaret didn't know what that meant, but she could feel change in the air. Something about the way Daniel looked at her, the way he lingered in conversation, told her that he had something to say, something important. As she drifted off to sleep, the image of his face stayed in her mind. That quiet smile, full of emotion, full of meaning. She didn't know it yet. But that smile would soon become the beginning of a revelation that would change everything between them forever. The next morning arrived with a heavy gray sky and the soft sound of rain tapping against the kitchen window. Margaret stood at the sink, lost in thought. She had barely slept. Daniel's suggestion of a trip had filled her with a mix of excitement and worry. He had sounded serious, almost emotional, when he brought it up. Something in his tone had made her feel that this wasn't just about a vacation. It was about something deeper. Daniel came downstairs quietly, wearing a sweatshirt and holding his phone. He smiled when he saw her, that same gentle smile that always seemed to say more than words. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, forcing a smile. "You're up early again?" He nodded, setting his phone down. "Yeah, I couldn't sleep. I was looking at some places we could go. Maybe somewhere peaceful like Maine, or maybe the countryside in Vermont. You'd love it there." Margaret's heart warmed at the thought. "That sounds lovely," she said. "But you don't need to plan all that for me." He leaned against the counter. "I want to. You've done everything for me. Maybe it's time I do something for you." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're too sweet." But behind her smile, she felt that strange tension, again the feeling that he was saying goodbye in pieces. Though she didn't know why after breakfast. Daniel went out to run errands while Margaret tidied the house. She found herself staring at old photos on the mantel, pictures of Daniel as a child, his big smile lighting up every frame. She touched one gently, her chest tightening. How quickly time had gone by. When Daniel returned, he found her sitting on the couch, flipping through an old photo album. "You were such a happy kid," she said, with a nostalgic smile. He sat beside her, glancing at the photos. "Yeah, you made it easy to be happy." They both laughed softly. There was warmth in the moment, but also something unspoken, like both were holding back tears they didn't understand. That evening, Daniel suggested they take a walk despite the drizzle. Margaret hesitated, but agreed. They walked through the quiet neighborhood, their shoes brushing through wet leaves. The air smelled like rain and pine, and for a while, neither said anything. Then Daniel spoke quietly. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret anything? About how life turned out?" The question took her by surprise. She looked at him, trying to read his face. "Everyone has regrets," she said softly. "But I've had a good life. Raising you was the best thing that ever happened to me." He stopped walking and looked at her. His eyes were bright but serious. "Even though it was hard." She smiled sadly. "Yes, even then. You made it worth it." He nodded, then looked away, hands in his pockets. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. How much you gave up for me. I don't think I realized it until now." Margaret felt a lump form in her throat. "That's what parents do, sweetheart. You don't have to thank me for that." But he shook his head. "No, Mom, you don't get it. You did everything. You worked 2 jobs. You were there for every little thing. You never complained." She blinked away tears. "I just wanted you to have a better life." He smiled faintly. "And I do. Because of you." They continued walking in silence, the rain softening to a mist. Margaret couldn't help but feel that Daniel's words carried something more like he was preparing her for something. The thought unsettled her. When they returned home, Daniel went straight to his room. She could hear him moving things around, opening drawers. Later, he came downstairs holding an old wooden box. He set it on the table. "What's that?" she asked. He opened it carefully, revealing a collection of letters, photos, and small keepsakes from his childhood. "I found these in the attic last week," he said. "I've been meaning to show you." Margaret smiled, recognizing some of the drawings and school photos. "You kept all these?" He nodded. "Yeah, every memory matters." He handed her a small envelope. "There's something in here I wanted you to read." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside was a folded letter written in his neat handwriting. She glanced up at him, but he just smiled quietly and said, "Go on." The letter began simply, "Dear Mom, if you're reading this, it means I've finally found the courage to say what I never could before." Margaret's heart skipped a beat as she read. The words were full of love and gratitude, memories of their life together, moments she had long forgotten. But as she read further, the tone grew heavier. "I've been keeping something from you. Not because I don't trust you, but because I didn't want to worry you. I've been sick for a while. The doctors say it's serious, and I might not have as much time as we thought. But I'm okay, Mom. I really am. I just wanted to make sure you knew how much you mean to me. You're my home, my heart, and my reason for everything." Her breath caught in her throat. She looked up at Daniel, who was watching her, eyes calm but full of emotion. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" He reached across the table and took her hand. "Because I didn't want you to be scared. I wanted you to have peace. I wanted us to have time together that wasn't about fear." Tears filled her eyes. "No, Daniel, you should have told me." "We could have." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know, Mom, but I wanted to spend whatever time I have left making you smile. You've carried enough pain for both of us. I didn't want to add more." Margaret couldn't stop the tears now. "You're my son," she whispered. "You could never be a burden." He smiled softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I know, but I needed you to see me happy. That's why I smiled at you that morning. I wanted you to remember me that way." She broke down, leaning into him as he held her. The moment felt both unbearable and beautiful. The truth hurt, but there was love in every word he spoke. After a long silence, Danelle said quietly, "That's why I wanted to take that trip. I want us to go somewhere peaceful, just you and me. I don't know how long I'll be able to travel, but I want one last adventure with you." Margaret looked up, her eyes red but determined. "Then we'll go. We'll go anywhere you want." He smiled a soft, radiant smile that seemed to hold light even through the tears. "Thank you, Mom." That night, after Daniel went to bed, Margaret sat alone in the living room, holding the letter. The rain had stopped and the moonlight shone through the window, bathing the room in silver light. She felt a strange calmness settle over her grief. The truth hurt deeply, but knowing it gave her strength, she understood now why. Daniel's smiles had felt different, why they carried so much emotion. They weren't just gestures of love. They were gifts. Quiet moments of hope he wanted her to remember. Margaret whispered to the empty room, "You're not going anywhere alone, Daniel. I'll be with you every step." Upstairs, Daniel lay awake too, listening to the soft creak of the house, thinking of the years they had shared. His mother had always been his anchor, his reason to fight. And now, knowing she finally understood, he felt something he hadn't in months' peace. Outside, clouds began to part, and the first stars appeared through the dark. Both of them, in their separate rooms, looked toward that same sky and felt the same unspoken promise that love, no matter how fragile, would carry them through whatever came next. The days after Daniel's confession felt different. The house seemed quieter, but the silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful, almost sacred. Margaret moved through her routines with a new purpose. She wanted to make every moment count, to fill each day with warmth and laughter, not sadness. She refused to let fear take over. Daniel, true to his word, stayed cheerful. He spent more time with her, helping in the garden, cooking dinner, and watching old movies. Sometimes when she caught him staring out the window too long, she'd gently nudge him and say, "Don't drift off on me." Daniel, he'd smile and reply, "Never. Mom, not as long as you're here." They began planning the trip they'd talked about. Maine, he'd decided. Somewhere by the ocean where they could watch the sunrise together. Margaret agreed immediately. She'd never been one for travel, but for him, she would go anywhere. A week later, they packed their bags and drove north. The road stretched endlessly, lined with autumn trees glowing red and gold. Margaret kept glancing at Daniel as he drove, his face calm, his eyes bright even though she could see the tiredness behind them. She wanted to freeze the moment forever, to stay in that car with him laughing at the radio, talking about childhood memories. When they finally reached the coast, the ocean spread before them, vast and blue. The cottage Daniel had rented was small and cozy, with white curtains that fluttered in the sea breeze. He grinned as he opened the door for her. "Perfect, right?" "It's beautiful," she said softly, her heart full. They spent the next few days walking on the beach, collecting seashells like they used to when he was little. The salty wind tangled her hair, and Daniel teased her for it, just like old times. At night, they'd sit on the porch, wrapped in blankets, listening to the waves. One evening, as the sky turned orange, Daniel handed her his phone. "I want you to record something," he said. "What kind of something?" she asked, smiling. "Just say something about us, about what makes life worth living." She laughed lightly. "Oh, you mean one of your deep thoughts again?" He nodded. "Humor me." She took the phone, pointed it toward the ocean, and spoke softly. "Life is made of small things. Morning coffee, long talks, the sound of laughter in the kitchen. You never know which moment will matter most until it's gone. So you hold on to love, to family, to the people who make the world feel like home." When she looked up, Daniel was watching her with quiet pride. "That's perfect," he said. "You always know how to say things, right?" But later that night, when she checked her phone, she noticed Daniel had left a note in her drafts folder. It was short, written just days earlier. "If you ever miss me, look toward the sunrise. I'll be there. That smile you gave me every morning is what I'll carry forever." Her breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wake him. She knew he wanted her to find it, this way to remind her that even when he was gone, his love would stay. The next morning, Daniel woke her early. "Come on," he said, grinning. "The sun's rising." They walked to the beach in silence, their feet sinking into the cool sand. The sky was pale at first, then burst into shades of pink and gold. The ocean shimmered, waves whispering softly against the shore. "This is it," Daniel said quietly. "This is what I wanted you to see." She looked at him, memorizing every detail, the way his hair caught the light, the warmth in his eyes. She wanted to say something, anything, but her throat tightened. He smiled that familiar, gentle smile. "Thank you for everything, Mom." Her heart ached, but she smiled back. "No, Daniel. Thank you for every moment." They stood there together, the rising sun painting the world in gold. It felt endless, peaceful, like time itself had stopped to honor their bond. In the days that followed, Daniel grew weaker. He never complained, never showed fear. He spent his time reading, writing small notes, and telling her stories from his childhood that she'd long forgotten. Each story felt like a farewell wrapped in love. One night, Margaret found him sitting on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, looking at the stars. "You should be in bed," she said softly. He looked up at her and smiled. "I just wanted to see the night one more time." She sat beside him, holding his hand. They stayed there for hours, watching the constellations appear one by one. He spoke quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "You know, Mom, people say the stars are just light from the past. I think love is like that too. It keeps shining even after we're gone." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "Don't talk like that." He squeezed her hand gently. "It's okay. I'm not scared anymore." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then I'll be brave too." That night was their last conversation under the stars. A few weeks later, Daniel passed peacefully in his sleep. The morning was still and silent. The ocean outside their cottage glimmered under a soft dawn light. Margaret sat by his side, her fingers intertwined with his, her tears falling quietly. There were no words, only love, deep and unbroken. The following days were a blur of phone calls, arrangements, and condolences. Friends came and went, offering comfort, but Margaret's heart felt both heavy and strangely calm. She knew Daniel was free now, free from pain, from fear. When she returned home, the house felt too quiet. Yet everywhere she looked, she saw him. His books, his old sneakers by the door, his handwriting on sticky notes left on the fridge. One note, stuck above the coffee maker, made her stop. "Don't forget your morning smile. It makes the world brighter." She smiled through her tears. Months passed. The garden bloomed again, the house filled with light. Margaret began volunteering at a local community center, helping young people find direction. It made her feel close to Daniel, somehow, to keep giving, to keep caring. Every morning she walked to the park with a cup of coffee and sat on a bench near the lake. She'd watch the sunrise, the same way they had in Maine. The colors always reminded her of him, soft gold and pink, warm and alive. One morning, as she sat there watching the horizon, she felt the sun's rays touch her face. She smiled, whispering to herself, "I see you, Daniel." It wasn't sadness she felt anymore, it was peace. From that day forward, she made it her quiet mission to share that peace with others. She'd talk to neighbors, help strangers, and remind people that life, even in its hardest moments, was still beautiful. Every time she smiled, she felt Daniel there, somewhere between the light and the wind. Smiling back years later, when people asked about her greatest memory, she would simply say, "It was the morning my son smiled at me, and I finally understood what it meant to love without fear, to live without regret." And every sunrise after that carried the same silent promise: love doesn't fade. It just changes form, finding new ways to stay.